Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is focus on the water. So I just created this plane and I'm gonna assign to it a redshift material, and I'm gonna use the water preset that comes with redshift. Then I'm gonna duplicate the plane, as you can see here. I just enabled the soft selection tool, and I'm just quickly blocking out a terrain. I will probably replace the terrain with a world machine terrain later on, but it's just to see what I'm doing now. Okay, so this looks pretty cool. I'm gonna add a little bump node, and I'm gonna use a noise. Actually, it's gonna be enough. I don't need to create a texture. I will probably do like a proper ocean simulation a bit later, but we'll see that in the shading phase. Slightly tweaking the roughness and the refraction just to have like really a basic water. Doesn't need to be perfect for now. We're not yet in the shading phase of the process. Okay, so now I'm back into world machine, and I'm gonna use one of the example terrains they have, because they do have this mountain with the lake. And I'm just simply changing the layout using, in this case, a radial grad. Then an advanced proline that I plugged into the basic noise. I just did a little inverter here, which is one of the many nodes that has world machine. So nothing too complicated here. As you can see, I'm not an expert in world machine, and that's why I don't hesitate to use like the example terrains, and I greatly encourage you guys to do the same. It's a great way to learn, I think, and in this case, it's just gonna work perfectly. Because, I mean, I would say that in this case, we just need a terrain. It doesn't need to be like a super precisely defined terrain. Just basically any terrain with some kind of lake in the middle will do. So that's what I'm doing here. I think we're almost good. Playing a little bit with the curve. And it's already pretty good, as you can see. All I want really is to have like a terrain that sort of circles around my lake. Doesn't need to be perfect once again. Alright, I think this is pretty good already, so what I can do is try to export this using the mesh output node once again. Building this terrain. I will probably, once again, build this terrain into different resolutions. So let's start with the high-res version of the terrain. Write output to disk. Right. Now let's rebuild the terrain in a slightly lower resolution. There we have it. It's still pretty decent. Might work. So let's export this. At this point, I don't know exactly which version I will use. If I can afford to use the lowest one, I will do it. So now let's import this into Maya the same way as we did it for our main hill and for foreground terrain. Let's group those once again so we can modify them together. And let's hide the one that we're not going to use for now. So right now I hid the high-res version. And let's try to see how this could sit in our scene. It's obviously too high for the moment, so I'm going to try to tweak this a little bit. And once again, as you can see, I always see things through the eyes of the lens, because that's the only thing that matters, how it looks in the shot. I will probably go back to World Machine to tweak this a little more, but right now I think it's already quite good. I'm just going to flatten it. And I think all of this sits quite nicely in my scene. And also, I know that in the reference that we have, it's not exactly a lake that we have. It's just like this kind of puddles. But the more I think about it, the more I think we'll have like an actual lake with probably like a proper ocean simulations and animated noises. But we'll talk about that later during the shading phase. Let's just quickly launch an IPR render to see how this looks. Once again, always through the shot cam. Okay. Let's just assign our basic terrain material to this. Now, you can already see that it's starting to take a little bit longer to load the geometry into the cache. That's the thing about GPU rendering. It might take a little while to cache all the information into the GPU. Okay, so one last thing I want to show you guys is another way to use World Machine by not importing the actual geometry, but just exporting a height map from World Machine. That's another way to really optimize the size of your scene. So I'm not sure I will actually use this terrain, but I'm still gonna do it just to show you guys. So I'm just creating another terrain that I will see maybe sitting in the middle of the lake, like some kind of island onto which the bridge could be sitting, for example. And this is already pretty good. So as you can see, the only thing that I changed is the layout. So it's really simple. You just draw another layout, then you make this layout go through the same nose, and you could have something pretty good right away. Okay, let's build this world at the right resolution once again. So what I'm going to do here, as I said, is just export a height map. So what that's going to do, it's going to actually create the terrain, but it's going to only be visible during the rendering. We will just use like a simple plane inside of Maya and we'll apply to this displacement map. So that's why I also built this terrain to a higher resolution, because I will not use the geometry. That means I can really do something quite detailed. So I will have like a super detailed displacement map that will give me plenty of details during the rendering without having the weight of the geometry into the scene. So as you can see here, what I did is create a plane. Just make sure to give it enough subdivisions, and I applied a new redshift material, and into the displacement slot I created displacement shader, and that's where I plug my displacement map. And if you go into the attributes, you can turn on displacement and tessellation, then play a little bit with that, and that's how you'll see the terrain appearing here. So we only have our plane in the scene, but the rendering we can see the effect of the displacement map, and that is really a really powerful tool to get a lot of details for free, I would say. Obviously, this will need a little bit of tweaking. I might once again need to go back to World Machine a few times, but it's going to be really easy because all I will have to do is to re-export a height map and just then replace it into my displacement shader. And as you can see, it looks already pretty good. And I do this to once again break a little bit the repetitions. So we have something a bit more interesting because this bridge is really long. So even with the towers that I added and the variations that I will try to have into the textures, I still want to add as much stuff to break the repetitions as I can. And speaking about adding details to break the repetitions and to add variations, what I'm doing here is also something you could do, is to slightly deform the geometry, because nothing is perfectly straight. That just makes stuff look CG. So I'm adding a little bit more subdivisions here using the Add Edge Loop tool, and I'm just moving stuff around slightly. And doing this kind of stuff is just going to give you this extra level of realism, I would say. Because if you just make that experiment, go onto a bridge that is supposed to be perfectly straight, and just place your head like perfectly in the axis of the bridge, and you will see that is far from being perfectly straight. You have plenty of variations and imperfections, so you want to try to add a little bit of that into your scene. So I'm just moving vertices around and edges. It might look quite crude like this. It doesn't look like an actual super professional way of doing 3D. I recognize that. But that's really what you should do if you are a matte painter, I think. Our job is to do movie magic, to create illusions. So everything just needs to work for the shot. Okay, so I think this is already pretty good for this bridge. Just adding a bit more details and playing the shot over and over again. Also, that's something that you want to do, because the more you will play the shot, the more you will see stuff that doesn't work. So try to play this shot as much as you can. Okay, so one very last thing I want to do before moving on to the next part of the process is to just delete a few of the faces that I don't need. And that is just to make the scene as light as I can, because even though right now it's still quite light, you will see that once we keep moving on and we start to add scans and trees, the scene is gonna be really, really heavy. So try to get rid of as much geometry as you can that you don't need. But other than that, I think we're pretty good to move on to the shading. Now, at this stage, the modeling is not completely finished, but in my opinion, it's good to, as soon as you can, start moving on to the shading, because those parts go hand in hand. I mean, I personally don't like to model everything into the tiniest details, then start to shade from scratch. I like to move on with the modeling, then stop it at a certain part of the process, then start the texturing, lighting, and then come back to modeling. So you will see as I move along into the next phases of the process, I will keep adding stuff. I will keep refining my modeling. I will also keep probably coming back to World Machine. So doing matte painting is really juggling between all those different parts of the process and all those different processes and softwares. So just make sure you've understood the techniques that I've used, because I will keep using them during the rest of the tutorial. So once you've understood those processes, we can move on to the shading.